Hello everybody, so this is the final part of my response to ContraPoints' video, Pronouns. And as I've mentioned before, it's one of the videos which is the most substantial in terms of trying to argue why it makes sense to say that, man and woman should not be understood with reference to biological sex, but rather with reference to something else. And the main argument seems to be social roles. The issue is, so far it has not done a particularly good job at this. And I would recommend in this case that you do actually go back and watch part 1 and part 2 because there's lots of stuff which was wrong in those, and I'll probably be recording this video with those previous mistakes in mind and referring back to previous mistakes. So it's important that you actually do watch those because this isn't really an episodic series. And with that said, I'm just going to continue exactly from where we left last time to start our response this time.
Look, I'm not going to tell you what pronouns you have to use. I'm just going to tell you how I use pronouns and my reasoning behind it, and you are welcome to use your free speech to choose how much of an obstinate hobgoblin you want to be.
So again, the issue is, telling me how you use pronouns and why you use pronouns that way is fine. I mean, I kind of thought that's what you were already doing in the video, so I'm not sure what the rest of it was supposed to be. But yeah, it's totally fine for you to explain why it is that you think it's appropriate to use these terms. It's also perfectly fine for me to disagree. It doesn't make me an obstinate hobgoblin. I would argue it actually makes me quite reasonable and rational, because I don't think the arguments you've presented should convince somebody who is reasonable and rational.
I might ordinarily default to female pronouns, but that would be wrong, since I happen to know this person is not only a man, he is the man, YouTube's most regal makeup artist, his lordship John McClane, and he uses...
Okay, so this is interesting because this is a point I very frequently make. So, I mean, this is the point being made for me. There are examples of men who might actually look somewhat convincingly like women, or at least like they're trying to be women, such that you might, for social expediency, refer to them as a woman, which is, of course, the central argument ContraPoints was making earlier on. And this would, show why that doesn't work, because if your logic is, well, we should say people who want to be called women are women because we should say people who look like women are women, well, there might be some people who look somewhat like women but don't want to be called women.
So let's recap. There are gender non-conforming men who present very femme but use male pronouns. There are cis men who use female pronouns whenever they present female. There are gender fluid people who use different pronouns depending on their current...
So I'm just going to stop here and say that, basically what's being explained is that there's lots of different complicated things, which if you're going to buy into the whole idea that transgender identities are valid, you have to wrestle with all of these different complex things and try to come up with some kind of coherent explanation for how this all makes sense, but in a way which, is also coherent and logical and intuitive and all that kind of stuff. And you can't. Spoiler alert, you can't. And it's much easier to say if somebody's a biological female, they're a woman. If somebody's biologically male, they're a man. That's a very simple, coherent system. And even while there are complexities when it comes to differences of sexual development, there's nothing like as many complexities as ContraPoints is still in the middle of laying out here.
So you really can't just rely on the way a person looks, because there's a lot of situations where the way they look doesn't tell you the whole story. So, as you can see, identity definitely is important, but it's also not the only thing that matters.
Okay, I'm excited to see how this actually ends up as an actual argument, because so far, obviously, the majority of the video has been not talking about identity, only really talking about looks and how you present. How are you going to make it so that I should be convinced that somebody's identity should be what I use to determine how I refer to them?
Pronouns belong to the social world of language, not to individual psychology. This is an idea I tried to explore in my sexy furry video.
I haven't seen that video because I didn't think it would have much to do with gender identity, but maybe this is a reason why I should go back and watch all of these things. But I do just quickly want to say that to say that pronouns aren't part of psychology and therefore aren't to do with identity, I think is silly. Pronouns very much are to do with identity. They're also social. I don't know why Contra seems to have this weird exclusivity thing going on where if something's this, it can't also be this thing. And it can. I would say that pronouns are about identity and they're about social performance.
So if, for example, you're a trans woman still living as a man, then you are fully trans, your identity is fully valid, but until you begin living as a woman, your womanhood remains kind of hypothetical. And when I say living as a woman,
Okay, so it's worth noting, incredibly misogynistic. Like, the thing is, again, obviously the big issue with the whole like trans identity thing is it's either brazenly misogynistic or makes absolutely no sense. The absolutely no sense stance is just to say that I right now could be a woman just because secretly behind the scenes I think I'm a woman. I mean, people joke about me. I say joke, actually. Some people say it with like sincerity. I don't know to what extent people say it seriously, but a lot of like trans identity critics of me will like imply or try to argue that I'm secretly actually trans and that I must actually be an egg, as it's called. And it's worth noting, if that were true, it would mean that, for example, I'm a woman right now, because even though I've never said I'm a woman, never argued I'm a woman, never presented as a woman, never done anything to make it seem as if I'm trying to communicate that I'm a woman, the fact that I deep down am trans would, according to the logic of transgender identity, mean that actually I'm a woman right now and you just don't know it. You can see how that's completely nonsense and ridiculous. But the flip side is to say what Contra just said there, that part of your womanhood, what takes your womanhood from the hypothetical into the real, is acting like a woman, acting out stereotypical femininity. And that is deeply sexist. You're arguing that, your womanhood is hypothetical until you act out. And of course, this does create a question, how does this work with biological females? Lots of biological females aren't doing anything much to present as women. They're just, not putting on makeup, not really wearing particularly feminine clothing, not trying to look womanly at all. They might even cut their hair short. The reality is, if a woman, a biological female, cuts her hair short, wears shirts and jeans, and doesn't shave, for example, then she's still a woman, right? But actually, if she were biologically male, then she would, right now I'm wearing a shirt and jeans, and I haven't shaved in a while. I have long hair, so if anything, I'm like closer to presenting as stereotypically feminine than a woman would be if she'd done all the things I just said. So therefore the question becomes, considering that woman isn't really presenting as feminine at all, is her womanhood theoretical? Well, it's not, is it? She's a woman because she's biologically female. It's not something she's putting on as a costume. It's not something she's presenting as. She's biologically female. I just think that's like an interesting point, that you're kind of admitting there that for a biological male, until they put on this incredibly elaborate costume, their womanhood is only hypothetical. But for actual women, biological females, guess what? They don't need to put on a costume to reify the reality of them being a woman. That they are women is automatically real because of biology. So I'm not sure how Contra would like kind of explain how, this like claim that biological males only really become women like properly when they like present as women, how that works with biological females. But apart from that, I do think a lot of trans-identified people might object to this, but of course also women should object to this, because it's implying that what Contra is doing right now, for example, is making Contra's womanhood be real. That this ridiculous outfit Contra is wearing speaks to Contra having been more of a woman in reality than if Contra just hadn't done any of this stuff, and that's just ridiculous. It's just so blatantly misogynistic.
You don't become a woman the first time you put on a dress. You become a woman the first time an older female relative turns to you at a restaurant and says, maybe you should order the salad, sweetie.
Okay. I know that's a joke, but it's kind of funny that like these are the same people who say that gender critical people only understand womanhood in terms of suffering, and yet now they're saying you become a woman when you experience misogyny. I know it's a joke. I realize it's a joke, but it's one of those, my kind of stance is like truth is said in jest. I genuinely think that's true a lot of the time, and I just find it funny that like here's the issue. If it is a joke, what point is Contra actually trying to make? Because Contra, like what I don't like about Contra is that there's just like this constant switching between like actually trying to make a point and then just inserting these like random little lines, and I'm left thinking, well, that sounds like a joke, but in that case, what's the actual point you're trying to make? In this case, obviously the argument is, well, you don't put on you don't become a woman as soon as you put on a dress. And then obviously then it just transitions to that joke comment about you become a woman as soon as somebody's like kind of says something misogynistic towards you, like that because you're a woman you should be watching your weight. But the question becomes, well, what are you actually saying though? Because it seems like what you're saying is, well, sure, it's not just wearing a dress that makes you a woman, it's embodying womanhood in a much more substantial and meaningful sense. And I would say, well, it sounds like that's just incredibly misogynistic then. I mean, sure, it's not quite as reductive as saying that you're, just what you're wearing makes you a woman. But I would argue reductionism isn't the opposite to misogyny. Like you can have a very non-reductive understanding of womanhood that is still plenty misogynistic. And actually, I would argue that a lot of the time, misogynistic understandings of womanhood are incredibly complex and sophisticated because they are part of this complex and sophisticated narrative that society tells itself in order to justify women's oppression, a narrative that ContraPoints is gleefully engaging in.
As far as I'm concerned, if a trans person hasn't transitioned yet, they are fully trans. I'm just trying to be realistic about the fact that a lot of people's gendered experience isn't entirely a product of how they identify.
So like it's very complicated, and I don't think it's complicated because I don't understand it. I think it's complicated because it doesn't make sense. Spoiler alert. But basically, the claim there was that like if you just feel like you're trans, that you're fully trans. Again, what the implications are, like, presumably you're fully a woman as well if your trans identity is that of a woman. But at the same time, Contra also said that your womanhood is only like theoretical, so I don't know. And then there's this kind of like, but how you look is part of your gendered experience. And it's like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Like, okay, like I'm willing to accept the idea that gendered experience is like a thing, because of course gender is a thing, and you can experience things like, for example, if I'm ever subject to some assumption about me based on the fact I'm a man, an assumption about how I should look, how I should behave, what I should be expected to do, that is a gendered experience. And of course, I'm very willing to accept that your gendered experience extends both from your sense of yourself and from other people's perception of you based on how you look. My question is, why are you saying that relates to whether or not I am a man, right? Like I might have a perception of myself that it makes me feel, I might feel very uncomfortable with the fact I'm a man, for example. That doesn't make me not a man. People might perceive me as not being a man or not being particularly manly, perhaps. That doesn't make me not a man. Why are you assuming that gendered experience should be the determinant in whether or not somebody's a man or woman rather than biology? You still haven't made that argument, which should be the most important argument to make, but you haven't made it.
Many trans women just seem like women to me, in literally the same way that cis women seem like women. And I use female pronouns for them effortlessly, just as I was trained to do from birth.
Okay, yeah, I mean, again, this is kind of touching on something I said. And again, I kind of said that, I have like this misogynistic idea where I attach being a woman to the stereotypical idea of womanhood, and therefore when I see a biological male engaging in the stereotypical idea of womanhood, there is a natural impulse for me to refer to biological males who I see acting out stereotypical womanhood as women. That I would agree with ContraPoints there, and I assume what ContraPoints is now going to say is, but then there's other trans-identified people who I don't just think of them as women, but I can tell that they're trying to be women or something like that.
I want people calling me she, not out of politeness or respect for my identity as a trans woman, but just because I seem like a woman to them. Because the reality is...
So basically, ContraPoints wants misogyny. I want people to have this idea that womanhood is attached to all of these stereotypes and like performance and all that kind of stuff. Great, yeah. That's the thing, like these people literally are endorsing misogyny. Saying, I want this. I want people to just think, oh, stereotypical depiction of femininity, that must be a woman. This is misogyny. It's undeniable misogyny. I don't see how anyone could argue this isn't misogyny. To literally be like, because for me, it's like so obvious that if I just see like stereotypical femininity and immediately think, oh, it's a woman, that is misogyny. I'm not, I'm reducing womanhood to just this stereotypical perception of, femininity. And ContraPoints is saying, yes, that's what I want. Like, this is the issue, yeah. Like, for me, as a man who engages with feminism, something I'm kind of aware of is that there's certain kinds of feminism which challenges my sexist preconceptions, and there's certain kinds of feminism which endorses my sexist preconceptions. And something I've become very much aware of is that the trans identity movement endorses my sexist preconceptions. Actual like radical feminists, actual feminists would challenge the sexist preconception I have that if I just see generic, traditional femininity and just think, oh, that's somebody being a woman, that makes that person a woman, they would challenge that and say, no, that's not the right attitude to have about what it means to be a woman. And they're right to challenge me. And that's it's one of the kind of hilarious things about people being like, oh, you just gender critical because you don't like the idea of being challenged, because you want to have your own limited worldview, this little box, and you just want to be comfortable and all that kind of stuff. It's like, no, look, if I didn't want to challenge my preconceptions, I just wanted to live completely comfortably, not have any of my like bad views challenged, I would be pro-trans identity. I would be like, oh, it's a stereotypically feminine person, it's a woman. That I would be perfectly comfortable doing that. Like, genuinely, I really do want to stress this point. I would be so comfortable just believing that stereotypical femininity equals woman. That would be so comfortable because it's what I've been raised to understand. It's an idea I'm very familiar with. It's my instinct. And it's what patriarchy has kind of communicated to me as like the way that I should understand somebody being a woman. It would be so easy, so comfortable, so effortless to say, yeah, so stereotypical feminine person, it's a woman. I would happily do that for ContraPoints. It would be like, I would so happily do that for ContraPoints. It was no problem, genuinely. It would be no problem for me at all. It would be so easy, but it would be wrong. Not only would it be wrong in terms of the coherence of that, but it would also be wrong morally, deeply wrong morally. It would be reducing women who are, equal in dignity and all that kind of stuff to men, to actually just this performance of stereotypical femininity, which is especially objectionable when stereotypical femininity, I would argue, is so kind of undermining to women in a lot of ways. So that just adds kind of insult to injury. That's the point. I'm here right now saying that ContraPoints is wrong, not because I want to live in my own comfortable little worldview where like I have this simplistic, bigoted, narrow-minded view of things, but because I want to break out of that worldview. And that's something which I think Contra is kind of tacitly admitting here, even while Contra will probably claim not to believe or recognize that reality. Yeah, I'll continue.
I'm gonna use female pronouns no matter what she looks like. Not just to be polite, but also because I want to recognize the reality of her psychological experience. And
well, look, nobody's saying you can't recognize the reality of that psychological experience. What you're doing is you're kind of just assuming that recognizing the reality of that psychological experience extends to recognizing that that psychological experience actually makes this person a woman. And you haven't argued that is the reality. Look, here's the thing. Nobody denies the reality of somebody's psychological experience when they say that they identify as a woman. I'm not denying that. I don't think anyone's denying that. What I'm denying is that that psychological reality extends towards an actual reality that this person is indeed a woman.
And especially because I want to help her re-socialize and reintegrate into the world as her true gender. And of course,
that almost sounds like it's saying, I want to help this person become stereotypically a woman, become stereotypically feminine. I don't know yet. I mean, it's kind of this term like reintegrate. I'm not sure exactly what it means. But yeah, that just sounds a bit suspicious.
We need to address the genderqueer elephant in the room. An increasing number of people identify not as male or female, but as non-binary.
Okay, I'm excited for this. We've got like 5 minutes left. I mean, I'm not sure how long the outro is going to be. With Contra, it's often like a quite extended thing. So I want to know how, with these 5 minutes, considering how disappointing the last 25 minutes have been, I mean, it's been fun in its own way, but how in these remaining 5 minutes we're going to get a coherent argument for why being non-binary makes sense.
Now, if your first impulse is to argue that singular they is ungrammatical nonsense, consider that having gendered singular third-person pronouns at all is a particular feature of the English language.
But we speak English, right? Look, at the end of the day, I started this whole series off recognizing that there is a legitimate criticism that can be made of using gendered third-person pronouns, making it so whenever you're describing what somebody did, there's a very real possibility that you are going to have to, in describing that, tell whether or not this person, say whether or not this person is a man or woman. And that shouldn't matter a lot of the time. That is a feature of the English language, and you can criticize it, but it's still part of the English language, and we are speaking English. So obviously when somebody says that any particular feature or potential feature of the English language contradicts what the English language or how the English language should actually function, they're clearly assuming the various features of the English language that exist, and pointing out these features may be unique to the English language is irrelevant.
Language is just a bunch of fucking sounds coming out of your mouth that humans make up to suit our purposes. If you're new to using singular they, it is a little confusing at first, but with some practice it gets pretty easy.
I don't really understand. Okay, here's the thing. I want to talk about singular they for a second. There's a really funny joke. I actually like, I will give credit where it's due and say that there are a handful, maybe, of like pro-trans identity jokes, which is to say, in effect, anti-GC jokes, which I do find funny. And my favorite joke is, or one of my favorites. I don't want to say necessarily that exclude any others, because maybe there are some other ones which I'll think of which I do find funny as well, or funnier. But it's kind of so let's say somebody says, if somebody tells me they want me to use a gender-neutral singular third-person pronoun, I just think they're an idiot. You can see, and obviously the joke there is that you are using a singular gender-neutral third-person pronoun. For me personally, I use singular third-person gender-neutral pronouns all the time. I use the singular they a lot. There's actually a quite funny James Acaster stand-up routine about this, about how some people say he and she, or he/she, he or she, whatever else. And obviously the easier thing to do is just to say they.
Said to this police officer, "What's your problem, man? Explaining witness protection to me. Never heard the word they before." He was like, fine. Sorry. When someone goes into witness protection, they or she.
Rather than saying, for example, if the candidate, we're looking for a candidate and he or she will have to do this, blah, blah, blah. Whereas you could just say, we're looking for a candidate and they will have to do this. It's quite simple, isn't it? It's quite easy. And it's certainly true that a lot of the time, the clumsiness of saying he or she every single time will result to people defaulting to the classic kind of patriarchal way of talking, which is just to say he. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the time, when I'm talking about a hypothetical person, and a hypothetical person, we don't know that person's gender, I still say he. I'd say, if somebody's going to go off to war, then he needs to prepare himself for the horrors of war, or whatever else. And the thing is, in that context, why is this person a man? I never said they were a man, but I kind of just accidentally communicated they were a man by defaulting to he. And there isn't really a problem with doing an alternative, which is to say, if somebody's going off to war, then they need to prepare themselves. I really don't find it that much of a particular challenge to refer to somebody as they, because of course, a lot of the time, it's just the easiest thing to do if you don't know whether the person you're talking about is a man or a woman. And a lot of the time, especially for me as somebody who talks about lots of theoretical scenarios, because I'm kind of interested in that sort of philosophy nonsense, I talk about hypothetical people all the time. So for that, it makes sense for me to just use the word they when talking about any given hypothetical person. So what I object to is not really calling somebody they. I mean, even when I know whether the person's a man or a woman, I'm still happy referring to them as they. You'll notice then, I'm talking about a person, a hypothetical person, so I'm happy referring to them as they. Even if I did know whether they're a man or woman, I'm still happy referring to them as they. Because I do see this idea that just having baked into our language, this person did something, and let me just let you know via my use of pronouns whether they're a man or woman. Why does that matter? Why is it if I tell you that somebody went to get a haircut, you don't need to know whether they're a man or woman? So I think, I'm kind of fine with this whole they, them thing. What I don't like is this idea that we should use they and them because some people aren't men or women. I'm happy using they and them to help communicate the reality that it doesn't matter if somebody's a man or woman, because it a lot of the time, and certainly as a default, shouldn't matter. Of course, when we talk about very specific things, it should matter whether somebody's a man or woman. But just generally, there's no reason for whether somebody's a man or woman to be information that's baked into the way we communicate in our language, and therefore I'm happy to use they and them. What I'm not happy doing is using they and them to kind of facilitate or go along with this idea that there are people who are neither men nor women. It doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, but everybody is either a man or a woman. So that's my discomfort with using they or them or their. And of course, yeah, it's a very limited discomfort because a lot of the time I'm perfectly happy doing it. But if I know that using they or them is implicitly buying into this idea that some people actually, as a matter of fact, are not he's or she's, that's when I begin to object.
So the polite thing to do here is easy. If someone asks you to call them they, you call them they. But if
yeah, okay, I mean, what does polite mean, Again, like at the end of the day, somebody's asking you to implicitly accept this idea, which is complete nonsense. As far as I'm concerned, it kind of goes beyond politeness to ask somebody to implicitly accept an idea which hasn't been evidenced. And yeah, I don't think this idea that there are people who are neither men nor women has been evidenced.
you're like me, you don't want to just do a thing because you dogmatically believe it's the woke thing to do. You want to understand why you're doing it. I don't just want to tolerate non-binary people. I want to be a convert. I want to believe about them what they believe about themselves.
Okay, that's like interesting. Again, I respect that desire to be like, well, I want to understand these things as true. I don't want to just do these things because I think it's the right thing to do. I want to do it because it actually makes sense. And again, like I will say, this completely destroys like a very common argument, an argument I've kind of said before is maybe the strongest argument for like accepting transgender identities as valid is like, well, it's complete nonsense, but it makes them feel happy, so you might as well do it. Like, and that's the thing, like that's an argument which I see from a lot of people. I mean, it's the argument, the only real debate I had with a transidentified transidentity advocate was with Vorsh. And Vorsh's main argument was just, well, it's harmful not to refer to people by their transidentity. Vorsh at no point argued that it makes sense to refer to people by their transidentity. At no point argued that transidentity is more in keeping with reality. He just said, well, transidentity makes people feel happy, and therefore if you're not buying into transidentity, you're a horrible person. And obviously Contra is here saying, no, that's not good. That's not the right attitude to have. You shouldn't just be doing something because it. So basically, if anybody ever kind of hits me with this, well, it doesn't matter whether or not it makes sense and coheres with reality. What matters is just that you're a nice person who goes along with it anyway. I can say, well, Contra, pretty representative kind of person talking about transgender identity on YouTube, says that's not the right attitude to have. And yeah, like I respect that. Of course, the issue is that then you have Contra saying, I want to be converted. Well, Contra shouldn't want to be converted. Contra should want to believe what's true. You'll notice, like, that's the funny thing about that word. Like, I want to believe that that non-binary identities are valid. Well, surely you should want to believe whether, what's true, and it might be the case that they're not valid, that it's nonsense to say that they are. So, yeah, Contra's attitude is, in that sense, not the correct attitude, and I think it makes sense, therefore, that when you actually look at Contra's arguments for why it does make sense to affirm transgender identities, it's immediately obvious that the logic just isn't there.
The Futch scale is a diagram that looks like this and quantifies from 1 to 10, or high femme to stone butch, the gender expression of a given domain, such as Mulan looks or Steven Universe characters. It can also be used more abstractly for weapons, fish Pokemon, or wind instruments. Maybe what non-binary people are trying to do with.
Okay, so essentially what's being established there is that there is like a spectrum from like masculinity to femininity, and you can be more masculine or less masculine, you can be more feminine or less feminine, which is true. There we go. So that's true.
Maybe what non-binary people are trying to do with words like genderqueer, agender, gray gender, and so on, is to give to identity the same kind of specificity the Futch scale gives to expression. But
okay, here's the thing. Identity is nonsense. Like femininity and masculinity, we all know what that is, right? Like, and while obviously the kind of specificity thing I think is a bit silly, you can, like, I'm very comfortable saying there are people who are more masculine than me and people who are less masculine than me. That's like a very easy thing. And of course, it's not like super simple, but you can generally say that, yeah, there's this idea. Whereas conversely, for example, There is nobody who is like, let's just establish this right now. Sex is not on a spectrum. There's nobody who is more male than me or less male than me. Everybody is equally male to me. I mean, sorry, not everybody is equally male to me. All males are equally male to me. And anybody who is not as equally male as I am is a female. Because sex is not on a spectrum. Gender expression, masculinity and femininity, yeah, that is on the spectrum. Yeah, I'm totally happy saying people are more masculine than me or less masculine than me. What about identity? No. There's no identity. First of all, the whole thing is nonsense in terms of like identity is just a descriptor. Like identity should be trying to communicate some kind of truth. If I say, for example, like I have lots of identities, I identify as straight, but you'll notice that's not just an identity, is it? Like my identity is straight. It's not just an identity. It has real implications. There's a red kite outside. I mentioned in my last video that red kites are my favorite birds, and I'm so transfixed by them. They're so beautiful. They're so perfect. Look at them. I just don't think there's a better bird in all the world. It's getting closer. Okay, it's gone. So yeah, if I say that I'm straight, I'm not just saying I'm straight, right? There's something you now know. You know several things now. You know that I'm attracted to biological females, that, that's the kind of thing I'm into, so on and so forth. If I say, for example, that I'm white, I'm not just, that's just not it's not just an identity. It's not just, oh, my identity is white. It's telling you that I have, pale skin complexion. I don't have much melanin. It tells you that my family heritage is from Europe. If I wanted to say, for example, instead that I was half black, you would therefore know that one member of my family instead has ancestry probably from Africa and has more skin pigmentation. Again, I'm not half black. I'm, as far as I can tell, fully white. But the point is, yeah, I haven't just said I'm white into the ether, just with no meaning at all. And of course, that's the same with lots of other identities I have. I'm also a Christian. If I say I'm a Christian, that's not just like an identity that just is nothing. It's not just like, I'm a Christian. Okay, thank you for telling me that word you used to describe yourself. No, it's not just a word I used to describe myself, is it? It tells you some specific things about what I believe. Now, of course, Christianity is a bit of a theological kind of thing, and there's like lots of different things you can believe, but you can probably at least have some idea of what it is that I might believe, what I'm likely to believe. I've definitely communicated something to you by telling you that identity. So if I tell you I'm a man, what have I communicated to you? Have I, and again, there's kind of three options. Either I've communicated to you that I am more like masculine. When I say I'm a man, I'm telling you, yeah, I go and watch the sports, and I'm actually I'm saying the sports. I don't want to do the whole sports school thing. I actually quite enjoy sports, but I'm saying I watch sports and I go and I pump my guns and I drink beer, whatever else, what men do, which of course is deeply, intensely sexist. There is, of course, the possibility, and this is, I must warn you before I say this, this is the most bigoted, disgusting thing that anyone could possibly believe. This is, if someone believes this, they should be arrested, they should be thrown in prison, the key should be thrown away. I think perhaps they should even be executed by firing squad. When I say I'm a man, I could be communicating to you that I'm biologically male. Apparently that is controversial. When I say I'm a man, I'm just saying, hey, I'm biologically male. You now know that information about me. It's kind of laughable to think that's like the controversial. I don't know, anyway. And then, of course, there's another possibility, which is when I tell you I'm a man, I am just communicating nothing. All I'm telling you is just a word I want to be called. Which, of course, as we said, is not the way when I tell you I'm straight, I'm not just telling you a word I want to be called. When I tell you I'm white, I'm not just telling you a word I want to be called. When I tell you I'm Christian, I'm not telling you a word I want to be called. When I tell you like any other identity that I might have, I'm not just telling you a word I want to be called. But maybe that's how we'll define man. Man is the one exception. Well, man and woman, the exceptions. It's just I want to be called a man or a woman. That's if that's what you're saying identity is, just as like a thing in itself, it's nonsense. Identities, if they do not communicate a more substantial truth, are, and I've used this phrase before, empty identities. So we're left with the very significant question, when people talk about gender identity, what are they talking about? I still don't really know. I think it seems to me it's just a word you want to be called, and I think that's just nonsense. I don't think that's the proper way to use the word man or woman. And then you get into the much more like crazy question, which is, how do you place this on a spectrum? You know, like considering we now have a completely meaningless thing of just man and woman means nothing. Say, well, I'm more of this nothing. Well, I'm more of this nothing. Like it's a number line where every single number is 0, right? It's like I'm 0 plus 0. Well, I'm even more 0. I'm 0 times infinity. I'm all the way over here on the 0 spectrum. I'm 0 times infinity times infinity times infinity. The biggest infinity imagined times 0. That's what I am. Look, if the identity you're talking about isn't describing anything, it's still 0. It's still nothing. So there is no spectrum. It's ridiculous.
But my input on this isn't really worth that much, because I'm not non-binary. And to tell you the truth,
my input on it is worth lots more than what lots of non-binary people have said. Non-binary people are talking crap, and I'm smart. I'm smarter than every single non-binary person who's ever existed, because I'm apparently able to understand the pretty simple concept that words have to mean things.
I kind of feel for cis people here, because all this talk about gender identity, a lot of the time, I don't really get it either. I look in...
Okay, it's because you're right. Just, I mean, I don't know, like ContraPoints, the thing about ContraPoints is, yeah, like basically there's this admission like, oh, I don't get this gender identity thing. And it's like, okay, so that's kind of good, but then it just lays bare what Contra's actual take is, which is, well, I'm a woman because sexism. I'm a woman because traditional performance of femininity. I'm a woman because of the role of women, which I fulfill, which is gross. So I don't know. Contra is maybe smarter in that, like, apparently there is this recognition that the whole gender identity thing doesn't make much sense, although Contra is like not actually kind of like committed enough to just recognize it doesn't make sense and has to be like, well, I don't understand it. No, I don't understand it because it doesn't make sense. But then, yeah, you realize that Contra instead has incredibly sexist beliefs, which underpin why Contra, is thought of to be a woman.
Which is the only way I can achieve the same level of sadness and dysfunction as everyone else. And I identify as trash. I guess there are...
Look, I mean, here's the thing, you know, okay, I get it. How funny. Ha ha, so relatable. What humor. Ha 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 ha. Like this video to die instantly. Aren't we all so black-pilled and miserable and sad? Isn't it funny? Ha 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 ha. Which is fine. Everyone loves that kind of humor. But here's the issue. You should be trying to make a more substantial point rather than just joking around, right? Like, actually try to communicate something. You can't just, like, act as if you're about to reveal something and just be like, just drop these hilarious black pill jokes about how miserable and depressing life is.
Waiting in a long-ass line for the restroom, a big strong arm around my waist, being asked if I have any tampons, having tampons in case someone asks, a dude explaining philosophy 101 to me and me going, oh really? Wow.
Okay, so those are the things that make Contra feel like a woman. I probably didn't include all of them, but I don't know. I mean, yeah, is that what makes any of the women watching this feel like a woman? I mean, I've explained some philosophy stuff, so I would like to know, when you were sat here watching me explain some of this stuff, which, you know, I don't know if philosophy is the right word, but let's say philosophy. Let's allow that for ourselves. Did you go, oh really? Wow. Because if you did, then I guess that's what being a woman is. But I would think, yeah, maybe, I mean, again, like, it's just so unfortunate that what I'm about to say is such a horrible, disgusting, wicked, evil thing to believe, but it just kind of feels like maybe it would make more sense to say a woman is a biological female. Like, I know, sorry, okay, don't arrest me, officer. I know, I'm sorry, it's like, I should know that it's such an evil, horrible, disgusting thing to say, but it just feels like it might, rather than it being about, listening to Aretha Franklin or feeling a man around you or tampons, maybe it'll be about being biologically female. Like, wouldn't that, I don't know, it just feels like that would make sense. I must be missing something.
Express myself with diaphanous feminine gestures, that taking female hormones and having feminizing medical procedures makes me feel more at home in my body, and that I like it when other people treat me as a woman. Social.
Okay, so here's the thing. Let's say a few things. First of all those things you want to do, it's fine. Okay, it's fine that you want to do those things, or at least if it's not fine, it's not fine in such a way I can't be bothered to unpack right now. So right now I'm just going to say it's fine. But it's still not a woman. You're not a woman. Those things don't make you a woman. Like, you seem to think that, like, when somebody says that you're not a woman because you do something, it means that they're objecting to you doing those things. It's not what I'm doing. Like, you can do all those things, but it doesn't make you a woman. And as for like I want to be treated like a woman kind of talk, well, okay, but in that case, you want to be a woman according to a thing which shouldn't even, like, people shouldn't be treated as women. Like, okay, let's ignore the fact that, is there like a consistent way that women are treated? I don't know. But apart from anything, and also, like, I find this kind of weird because it's like people say, oh, there's no universal experience of being a woman anyway. Like, a lot of, like, the whole argument of, like, a lot of the time with the transidentity thing as well, there's no universal way of being a woman. Anyone can be a woman anyway, but apparently there's a universal way of being treated like a woman, so I'm not sure about that. But yeah, basically, like, the way people should treat you as a woman is just by acknowledging you are a woman. But again, that only makes sense if you are a woman. So anything apart from that is just, people should just treat other people like people, right? You shouldn't treat women differently from men. You should just treat everyone like human beings, and, everything else is kind of down to the individual. I don't know why you need to feel like you have to impose this idea on me that you are in fact a woman when I don't see any reason to accept that as true.
Socially, spiritually, sexually. So that's the jargon-free explanation of my gender as I see it. Am I really, truly a woman, ontologically, neurologically, metaphysically? Well, honestly, I don't even know what that would mean, but I do know.
Well, I mean, okay, you don't know what it means. It means reality, right? Like, there seems to be this idea that, like, ontology is something apart from reality, but ontology literally is reality. Like, ontology is about what's true. So that's reality. So the question is, are you a woman? It's not like ultimately, if somebody says, are you a woman, ontologically speaking, it's like, well, that's just reality itself. And therefore, and the answer, by the way, in your case is no. But yeah, I don't think it's exactly complicated what it means. I mean, like, a lot of those things weren't, like, neurologically, well, are there such things as male and female brains? I don't know. But if there are female brains, there would presumably be brains that are possessed by females. And you're not a female, so again, no.
That the life I live as a woman is the only life I have, and that, I think, is legitimate enough. So.
But, okay, but you're not a woman, so the life you live as a woman is actually a life you live as a man, and that's enough. So the good news is that you're fine being a man then. I've kind of pointed this out before, I think, even with regards to ContraPoints. Like, Contra's argument is like, well, I'm satisfied being who I am. It's like, okay, well, that's fine then, because you're a man, so you don't have a problem being a man. So everything's fine, there's no issue. Great, we're all happy.
Oh, I know what living as a woman means to me, but what does it mean to live a non-binary life? Well, just like what it means to be a man or a woman, that's something that's going to vary between individuals and cultures.
I mean, you're just going to get a non-answer, because, like, Contra's already admitted this thing doesn't even make any sense, but okay. Let's just explore the non-answer.
Some cultures have ancient third-gender traditions, such as the Hijra of South Asia, a legally recognized gender in India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh, or the various two-spirit.
Well, again, but here's the thing. Are those people actually not men or not women? in reality? And if so, are you arguing that like sexist gender roles in like gross caste societies should be how we understand whether somebody's a man or woman in the modern day, which is pretty ridiculous.
We have a lot in common, binary and non-binary trans people. Even as a binary trans person, I used to live as one gender and now I live as another gender. That in itself is a pretty serious challenge to the stability of the binary. But many of the people who call themselves non-binary...
Again, like, what do you mean live as... Look, nobody's arguing that there isn't a... that you can't live outside of this strict binary of men living one way and women living another way. Lots of people do that. Does that make you not a man or not a woman? That's the big issue, and it's an issue you haven't addressed.
I'm just trying to assimilate into a pre-existing female gender role. As you can see by the normal way I'm dressed. The traditional female...
Look, basically, again, we've already established it before. Contra's whole thing is I'm just trying to go along with patriarchy and misogyny.
And sometimes that puts me at cross purposes with some non-binary people who, for example, promote the practice of always asking for someone's pronouns. Whereas, I love it when people assume my gender, provided they assume it correctly. Otherwise...
See, this is funny because this is like the whole thing the ContraPoints said that like created a massive controversy and like cancelling because, yeah, Contra, I remember like that was the big tweet that like caused Contra to get cancelled. Contra basically saying, yeah, literally just that. I love it when people assume my gender and don't like the idea of like having to tell people gender. And that's the thing, like, yeah, you got to bear in mind that like the binary trans people, as Contra was referring to them, love like traditional gender roles loads. Don't get me wrong, the non-binary people still, well, I don't know. See, I would say the non-binary people, they don't exactly love traditional gender roles because they're not even engaging with them, but they still think traditional gender roles are what they want to define themselves in relation to. So I guess in that sense, they kind of love it. They love it as like a thing to, like a standard to rebel against, which of course, all of this is different from the gender critical point of view, which is that gender roles and traditional gender roles should just be rejected. Not like rejected as something we define ourselves in relation to, but rejected as something with which we should even consider relevant to our identity. And that's, of course, the correct attitude.
And though I cannot and will not force you, viewer, to do or say anything, I do hope you use your free will to freely choose to use your freedom of speech to choose to do the same.
Big fans know that I don't believe in free will because it doesn't make any sense. But, you know, I'm happy to understand that free will was being used in a different sense there. Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I'm not going to do that because it doesn't make any sense. You have to give like an argument. You did have 30 minutes to try and make an argument, and it wasn't like a great argument. The videos definitely got worse since like there's been an attempt to try and defend the idea of like being non-binary. Like the video was slightly more coherent when it was trying to defend like the idea of, you know, binary trans identities being valid, even though it wasn't great. Now it's got like less coherent and kind of just a lot more kind of nonsense mumbo jumbo. We will not be erased. Sounds like a white nationalist slogan. Good job. Okay. So, I guess this was kind of like the opposite to like a horror anthology show. Not in that it wasn't horrific, but rather in that a horror anthology show will usually contain like 3 stories across the space of one show, whereas this was one story across the space of 3 shows. And the story was that Contra wasn't that good, really. You know, like wasn't that great. Because, well, it just wasn't that good, really, was it? Because it wasn't that. The arguments, they just weren't that good. Okay, so yeah, basically, I don't really want to kind of summarize the whole thing too much, but I'll essentially say that you started off like this whole thing about like, well, it makes sense to say that a man or biological male who fulfills the role of being a woman should be described as a woman because it's easier. And there are loads of issues with that. Obviously, incredibly sexist and also just very incoherent because you would therefore have to say, well, what about like a, you know, and even Contra provided like evidence of this, like somebody who might actually in some way fulfill the role as of a woman, but not be considered a woman. That creates an issue. And then obviously it just moved into the whole like, here's why non-binary identities make sense, which contained a pretty substantial admission that like it doesn't really make much sense. But before then, just being like, yeah, but it's kind of fine, I guess, it's all right. It's a mess. It was a mess. But I will say, somebody said, if you want to respond to Contra, you want to dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, well, you can respond to this video. And yeah, overall, I mean, like, I do feel like now I feel like, at the end of lots of other ContraPoints videos, I don't feel like I debunked anything substantial. I don't feel like I debunked like the big point, I guess, of like Contra's whole kind of position. But I feel like at the end of this video, I have debunked something substantial. I feel like I've actually shown, like, Contra brought the best arguments for why it is accurate to say that biological males can be women, and I showed how it makes no sense at all, and actually the argument's pretty terrible. So yeah, ContraPoints debunked. As far as I'm concerned, yeah, I guess this was a significant video, because now, like, anything else I do, I'm pretty sure, like, yeah, this is the best arguments Contra could have made, and they weren't good. So, sorry. Anyway, if you like this video, please do like, comment, share, subscribe, all that. You can check out Twitter and Gilded, which is, if you don't know, it's like Discord, but it's not Discord. What else? Let's see. So, yeah, basically, if you give on Patreon, I really do appreciate it. Like, Patreon is good because it helps with what I'm doing with this channel. Provides some motivation. And of course, there's just a general kind of, you might feel compelled by a general kind of sense of like meritocracy being a thing where like I put in work to make these videos. So you think, hey, yeah, let's make sure that work is compensated with money. It's also true that I have a meritocratic impulse, which means the more money you give, the more money I will spend working on this channel. If I ever were able to like get a full-time wage from this channel, I would spend full-time 40 hours a week working on it, reading stuff, researching stuff, producing really high quality content. So yeah, very good reasons to give on Patreon. And with that in mind, I will say thank you on, frankly, the behalf of every single person who enjoys these videos to my current patrons. In addition to the names scrolling past on your screen right now, I would like to give a special thanks to last month's patrons, Charlotte, Sambuca, and Skeptical. You're all very appreciated.